Hello, calculus scholars. Today we're going to do skill 21, which is basically just looking at the derivative rules and kind of showing you the graphs and the table of value questions. So basically, we kind of take away a lot of like the tedious algebra work. So this is a lot more conceptual. So let's kind of generalize some of the rules here. So what you're going to see quite a bit is you're going to see that you're going to have this function h of x on your delta math, and it's going to give you some type of expression with like f of x and g of x. So the constant rule if your h of x equals to c f of x, then h prime of x is equal to c times f prime of x. So what you do is you just take the derivative and you put that constant in the front. Sum and addition is next. So if h of x equals to f of x plus or minus g of x, then h prime of x equals to f prime of x plus or minus, depending on whether there's an add-in or a subtraction sign, g prime of x. So what you do is you just basically take the derivative, and after that, you just add them or subtract them. So you just take those derivatives individually. Multiplication. This says if h of x equals to f of x times g of x, then this is your product rule. And h prime of x equals to f prime of x times g of x plus f of x times g prime of x. All right, and then we have, last but not least, the division, which is the quotient rule. So this says if h of x equals to f of x over g of x, then h prime of x is essentially your quotient rule. So it would be g prime of x times, or it would be g of x times f prime of x plus f of x times g prime of x over g of x squared. All right, and then there's one more rule that we will kind of discuss. But first, if you kind of notice here, you can kind of see them side by side. So when you have a multiplication and a division, you know, those are kind of like your quotient rule setups and your product rule setups. We also have the chain rule setup. So this is the function composition type of scenario. So if h of x equals to f of g of x, then h prime of x equals to f prime of g of x times g prime of x. And let me just make, yep, the parentheses are looking good there, so you'll get to see in a minute how this chain rule will work. All right, let's take a look here at an example. So this says find h prime of x, or h prime of 4 in the simplest form. So what we want to do here is I would first write this as h prime of x equals to f prime of x minus g prime of x. So I'm going to put in my f prime of 4 minus, so if I want to find h prime of 4, I do f prime of 4 minus g prime of 4. So that gets me to negative 10. And I subtract 1. And that gets me to negative 11. So this would be a pretty easy level table of value question. Let's look at something that's a little bit more about mid-level. So for this one, this is the product rule going on. So I like to actually write the product rule. So I have h prime of x equals to f prime of x, g of x, plus f of x times g prime of x. And if I want to find h prime of 4, I'm going to do f prime of 4 times g of 4, oh wait, actually of 2, I guess you're asking here. So I'm going to do f prime of 2. Hold on a second. So I'm going to do f prime of 2 times g of 2 plus f of 2 times g prime of 2. So I go and I find f prime of 2. That gets me to negative 3. I got g of 2, which is negative 8, plus f of 2, which is 4. And g prime of 2 is negative 10. That's going to get me to 24 minus 40 for a grand total of negative 16. So that's about mid-level. Let's look at advanced now. So this is where you have the composition of function here. So what I would do first is I would do the h prime of x. So this is the chain rule. So I'm going to do f prime of g of x times, it's a little multiplication, g prime of x. And if I want to find h prime of 3, I'm going to do f prime of g of 3 times g prime of 3. All right, so I know what g of 3 is. So that's negative 9. So I start inside. So no, start inside. So this is just kind of like how we thought about, we kind of like did U to kind of like model in the chain rule how we deal with the inside. So g of 3 is negative 9. And then I have g prime of or g prime of 3, and g prime of 3 is negative 12. So what I'm left with is just this f prime of negative 9. So I'm going to go to f prime of negative 9. So that gets me to -1 times -12, which gets me then to a +12. All right, now let's look at some table of value ones. So, or I should say graph ones. So hold on a second here. So here are derivatives graphically. So you want to treat these very similar to the way that the table of values are, with the exception this time that when we do our h prime of x, we are going to use the graphs instead after we come up with the initial setup. So this one is a classic example of a product rule. So I'm going to write h prime of x equals to f prime of x times g of x plus f of x g prime of x. And if I want to do h prime of -1, that's going to get me to f prime of -1 times g of -1 plus f of -1 times g prime of -1. Now, let's kind of translate the geek speak here. So this is important to write down on this delta math example. So I'd like you to kind of just write down, the rough graphs, but write down all of these major points here. So note, f prime of -1 means the slope of the graph of f at x equals to -1. So let's actually kind of reason that here. So I'm going to go to -1 on the graph of x, and we see that the slope is -2. I'm just going to make a note. F prime of -1 equals to -2. That's a slope. So that's going to be a -2. Our g prime, or our g of -1, is right there. So I'll go and look for that, and that is 6. Our f of -1 is 4. And then the slope of g is 0. So we get to -12 on that. So what you're doing basically here is you are just looking at the graph. If it is a non-prime, you're just finding the y value. And if it's a prime, you're like a derivative, then you find the slope. So remember, derivative equals to slope of curve at the point. And let's just try one more on for size. So here I'm just going to kind of get this so that it fits. So it says, given the graphs of f of x and g of x, determine h prime of 3. So this is a chain rule type of scenario here. So if I want to do h prime of x, so I like to do this first before I even think about a graph. I'm going to do f prime of g of x times g prime of x. So if I want to find h prime of, it tells me that I want to do h prime of 3. That's going to be f prime of g of 3 times g prime of 3. So I'm just going to put in my g of 3. I'm going to go to the graph g of 3, and that's going to get me to 2. And then the g prime at 3, the slope is 1. I'm just making a note here. Slope is 1 at x equals to 3. And then I go to my graph f. So f prime at 2 is down 2 over 1. So slope is negative 2. So it's going to be negative 2 times 1 for a grand total of negative 2. So that is how we do the derivative properties with graphs. So that's the other type of delta math set that I'm going to get. So thank you very much, and we will see you next class.